You're watching Captains on CNBC Africa. I'm chatting to Shameel Joosub, the CEO of Vodacom. Shameel, you took over September 2012, the 1st of September 2012, now almost 2.5 years. And your stress levels must be growing exponentially. You've got deflation on prices where voice and data are concerned, and your input costs are going through the roof. How are you coping?
Bronwyn, it has been tough. It's been a tough 2 years for the industry in totality. You know, obviously the whole mobile termination rate debacle didn't really help the situation. And I think when you take R1 billion off your bottom line, it causes let's just say a fair amount of stress. Look, it's a tough environment because we are going through a pricing transformation on top of the mobile termination rate decline, and on top of a number of different issues, especially inflationary increases, a weaker rand, and so on. So it is creating a fair amount of stress. What we're doing to cope with it, I think we're managing the situation quite well, and actually have landed up in a situation where we're at least maintaining or growing market share. And you know, the big thing is that I think we're basically firstly managing the price transformation well, and our strategy has really been very simple. What we're doing is we're investing quite heavily in our network. So this
you haven't pulled back.
Correct. So the way we've actually coped with it is very different to how I think some other companies are coping with it. Most other industries will be pulling back. We're actually investing. So what we've done is invested more into our network. And you know, combined with the acquisition of National, we've spent close to 10 billion this year in South Africa, and then next year we're planning to spend almost 17 billion in South Africa again, basically with the acquisition of Neotel, and again a massive capital investment of over 8 billion. So you know, and what we've done is we've used this to create capacity in our network to bring down pricing, but also to really cope with what I call the data revolution, and making sure that we're ready to capture it, and we're seeing that success come through.
It's been a long time for that regulatory approval to be underfoot, and there's still rumours in the market that we're not sure that the Neotel deal is going to go through. This must be very frustrating for you.
It is. It's extremely frustrating because I think the processes are just taking too long. We're on to our 9th extension with the Competitions Commission, and we're still waiting for ICASA to rule on the transaction. They're supposed to have ruled by the end of March. We're now hearing that there might be delays. So it's extremely frustrating because, in a number of ways, because we want to get on with it. And I think if we just take a step back and we look at what is it that we're trying to achieve, what we're doing is we're stepping up and saying we'll take on the role of being the second network operator. Neotel needs funding. It needs big capital to go in and really put in. Our fixed penetration is less than 5%. Most developed countries are sitting at 75 to 100%. So you know, we need to really step up our game, and you know, Neotel is that vehicle for us. We see it as an opportunity to grow, and really to capitalize the business properly and to build fiber to the home and fiber to the business. And that's what's going to get us to the goal.
A strong second network operator is needed for the consumer to benefit.
100%.
So you must be battling to rationalize the stalling from the Competition Commission. And of course you do have Cell C playing the victim in news headlines across the board here, saying that this will be the nail in their coffin if we do see a tie-up between Vodacom and Neotel. How do you respond to Cell C's accusations?
Well, I think firstly it doesn't really, because if you look at what the issue is and what people are making an issue about, so I think there's almost a unanimous view that it will benefit the consumer. But there's, and I mean, when we listened to the presentations at ICASA, there wasn't really anything substantial that really came out. So, you know, and most people they said, okay, so it will be good for consumer, but giving Vodacom more spectrum will be detrimental. And I think, you know, one needs to be careful because spectrum in itself doesn't create success. Spectrum with investment is basically what assists you. But also we have less spectrum than all the other operators. So we have the largest network with the least amount of spectrum, which doesn't make any sense. And secondly, I think we're really in a position where we're choking. because of the amount of investment that we've put in, and because of the data growth, data traffic's growing 75% a year. We're having to cope with it. Effectively, what you want to do is to make sure that we need the spectrum now to be able to do it. And I think we can, we've basically renewed our entire network. So the entire network is 4G ready. We've got 76% of our sites already on high-speed transmission of fiber. So we could switch on 4G countrywide, in a very short space of time. So, if we had access to spectrum.
You must be looking at the comments from MTN with interest. Again, they are playing, or they are crying foul over the Neotel Vodacom tie-up, but at the same time, you've got certainly indications that MTN and Telkom are getting into bed. It doesn't look as though there is much detail in terms of what that partnership entails, but surely on the other side of this, you can't have MTN and Telkom tying up when you can't do a deal with Neotel.
Exactly, and I call it the industry making a plan. And I think Vodacom and Neotel will basically help. And I mean, we're not being apologetic on the fact that we need access to the spectrum. We do, and I call it the industry making a plan because basically where we sit at the moment, the digital migration has not happened. It's supposed to have happened by June 2015. The International Telecommunications Union will stop the protection on those bands from June 2015. So we're at the risk of interference anyway. Now that program is going to take a good 3 years at least to be able to do it properly. So you have to get all TVs off analog onto digital. It's not an easy exercise, and we're still fighting about the box. And whether it is controlling software or not. So it's extremely frustrating because what's happening in broadcasting is holding up the ability for the industry to succeed. Also, if we're going to get to the broadband goals, we really need a mix of fixed and mobile. And we really need to implement 4G. And every delay is us slipping away from that 2020 goal, if you like.
And so keeping the country, or really destroying the ability of the country to compete effectively on the global stage. It all adds up at the end of the day.
100%. And I mean, so, also MTN is making a plan with its deal with Telkom. And South Sea can also make a plan because there's other holders of spectrum as well that are underutilizing.
So should you not just be making a plan then and not bothering with the Competition Commission?
Well, the issue really is, and yes, that is an option out there. There's also options to partner with some of the existing network operators. But I think the big thing for us is that Neotel came up for sale. It's a company that has done well in terms of with limited resources, but the company needs a big capital investment, and I think we're stepping up. And I mean, it was an open process, so I always find it funny that when people start commenting, but they had the opportunity to step up and say we'll do it, and none of them would be willing. Were willing
Otherwise,
to step up to the plate.
there would have been a bidding war, and there was no bidding war.
There wasn't
for Neotel. It must be, I'm just thinking now, if I was a fly on the wall, when you've got to go and explain to Vodafone in that boardroom, how do they view South Africa and the delays that we're seeing over the regulatory environment?
So the level of confidence on South Africa as a whole is very good, but I think the frustration is playing out at Vodafone as well as here, and it does become frustrating because you're also fighting for capital allocation, and you don't have an endless window because people find other reasons to spend the money, right? So you've got to. For us, it's important that we get the deal through, and that we can basically capitalize this business properly and grow it. I think the other big thing for us is that we don't have 20 countries that we invested in. We have 5 countries, we capitalize it well, and we look at the opportunities. That's why it's no secret that we have market share leadership in all those countries, because we put the commitment in, we put the capital behind. You basically got to put your money where your mouth is, and effectively drive the success from that part. And I think, and that's what Neotel is about. It's to say the mobile industry is saturating. Let's be honest about it. It is saturating. Voice is declining. It's declining every year. Data is growing, But data is a growth vehicle. You need to find other growth vehicles to be able to sustain the growth of the company. And here's an opportunity in fixed. And,
let's close out on the Neotel discussion. So they've said they're going to come back when? Let's just clear up. The Competition Commission has said that they will come back with an answer when?
So the Competition Commission keeps asking us for extensions. So we're not at the point where basically we have a clear timeline from the Competition Commission of when they'll give us an answer.
What about your timeline? How patient are you going to be before you start pushing back? Or are you prepared to just sit and wait?
So, it's the agreement obviously has long stop dates in and so on. And it is frustrating and so on. We committed to the process, but I think, every day lost is a day lost in the broader South African context in terms of the development, the investment that we could have put in, the jobs that we could have created. So, it's for me, it's very much what if we could have done it earlier kind of thing.
But you will wait. You will wait.
Well, it's basically between us and the sellers, really. Are the sellers willing to continue waiting? And obviously, circumstances change, things change. You'll have to do due diligence again. So it can become very, very messy. And I think the question really is, how long can Neotel cope without the requisite level of investment that is needed?
A question I'll put to Shameel Joosub in the near future.
More insights from Vodacom CEO Shameel Joosub after the break.
Let's talk now about the comments that you've made recently in the press. And that is that we're looking at potentially, or you're looking at potentially sharing costs, the input costs among different players in the mobile environment. I see that MTN SA CEO is definitely behind this strategy. Now, how do we make this work? And let's just use the example that you've both referred to openly in the papers, and that is the diesel generators, where you've got Vodacom equipment, MTN equipment, Cell C equipment. Why have 3 generators? Why not just share 1 diesel generator? So give me a little more insight into how you see this working out.
So I think what you're dealing with, Bronwyn, is really a situation where the industry is maturing. You've got inflationary pressures, you've got exchange rate pressures, and you're buying most of your equipment in foreign currency. Your rental escalations continue to grow, but your revenues are growing at single digits. So you've basically got to find ways to optimize your costs. And I think one of the opportunities that are there, which you're seeing worldwide now, is that there's more let's say, there's more, the operators have come to the point where they realize that, look, we have to compete, but there's areas that we can actually share.
Why duplicate?
Why duplicate?
Costs.
Exactly. So as an example, is really the generator part, because we've just spent 80 million on the power crisis in making sure that we buy more generators, so that we upgrading all our batteries and so on and so on. But there's definitely ways that we can share some of that, especially if we're going to go into a situation where the power crisis ends up lasting for a lot longer.
Well, it doesn't look as though it's going to end anytime soon, considering we're hearing absolutely nothing from the Eskom war room.
No, and obviously that's a major concern for us. And I think one of the things that we could potentially be looking at as well is how much off-the-grid power can we generate between the different players. So there's an opportunity there that we as an industry have to start looking at. How do we deal with this crisis, and how can we manage this crisis in a more effective way? But also when it comes to building fiber, as an example, we already have what we call open access fiber networks. So although people talk about open access fiber networks, your dark fiber Africas do that. They basically build fiber for us and then resell it to the other operators as well. So you are getting, and that's where an element of cost saving is coming.
Especially fiber in rural areas.
Correct. So when you start to, and a good example of where you can share is we built what we call the National Long Distance Network with MTN and Neotel. So we built a fiber from basically Joburg to Durban and Joburg to Cape Town. We're now busy speccing to basically connect Durban to Cape Town. Now, and obviously you pick up all the towns along the way. Now that in itself is not something that one operator can do individually. And it just makes a lot more economical sense if you build it together, because it's quite costly, because remember you're going through rivers and mountains and all kinds of things. So there's a lot of, it's quite a costly exercise.
Is there a risk that the Competition Commission is going to look at this, the strategy to share input costs and say, hang on a minute, what does this do to the end consumer?
Well, I think what it does is, if you're in a pricing transformation mode and you're bringing prices down actively, as we're doing, and I mean prices are dropping every year 25–30%, if not more. So what you're doing is you're saying, okay, I'm bringing down the prices. You need to, which is invariably landing up with a decline in revenue. You're trying to offset it with data, but data is not yet big enough to offset it completely. You have to then look at the other lines.
The sustainability of
correct.
the telecommunications industry.
100%. And you've got to say, look, where do we optimize further? And some of it is optimizing wastage in your distribution costs, as an example.
Are the CEOs of the mobile operators ready to leave their egos at the door? I
think it's extremely important that I think that we have to get to the point where we start to share more. And it also, if we start off with, my simplistic view is, let's take the 2020 goal that we're trying to achieve, and then let's work backwards per year. And then let's identify what are the roles of each of the industry players to get us there. And really, almost have an infrastructure planning committee that's going to take us to that, and see where the levels of duplication exist, and basically share. So it's really to say, share on the passive elements of the network and compete aggressively on the active part of the network. So we're not going to share the active parts of our network and the radio and so on that actually gives rise to the service that customers do. But you definitely can share on some of the other things. Another example would be, we have huge issues with theft. I mean, we've lost about 60 million this year just on theft at base stations. People stealing batteries, stealing fuel, those type of things. What you want to do is basically work with your competitors, because generally we're sharing the site. So in most cases, we share about 65% of the sites anyway. And
so
if you
share the vendor that's supplying the security services.
Exactly. And find ways to work together and with the police to basically help to catch the criminals, if you like.
60 million is a big hit to the bottom line.
Yes.
Shameel, how has your leadership style changed? Now, we've obviously spoken about the context in which you are operating, and it's tough right now. Has that impacted the way that you lead?
Well, yes. I think, in some instances you have to get deeper into certain issues. In other instances, you've obviously got to give the teams basically more room to basically take the decisions quicker, faster, to be able to get the success. I think what's important though is you need even tighter coordination between let's call it the different members around the table, and more interworking. And so a lot of I would say my leadership style is also trying to encourage more of that. When you're in a growth industry and you're growing a lot faster, then obviously you can always do it, not less, but you don't have to be as tightly linked at the hip. But I think when you're in a tough situation, it's even more important that all the people around the table, all your ExCo members, are working more tightly towards that. And knowing exactly where
they need to tighten their belts, so to speak. You mentioned that you have chosen a couple of key focus countries. You've got a grip on those countries and creating a dominant position. Are you finding the same stresses in the rest of Africa, those territories that you operate in, as what we're seeing in South Africa?
Yes. I don't think any country is easy. Everyone's got its own pressures, and the pressures differ. Sometimes it's regulatory, sometimes it's pricing. Where you'd have an aggressive pricing regime. As an example, we had that in Tanzania the last year, where effectively we had very aggressive pricing regime to the extent that the whole industry went negative, and then had to recover through actually starting to correct some of that. You'd have, governments dreaming up new taxes and saying, look, we want to implement a new tax. And then you've got to go and motivate, discuss, and so on. And I think that...
Do you still believe in the rest of Africa growth story?
Yes, very much. Very much. I think the opportunity is vast. I think we're still at the infancy in terms of data growth in Africa, and there's still a lot to be done in still of pure coverage and so on. And the opportunity is vast, and I think it's really, for us, it's important because it does give you more areas to grow into.
We've spoken about the tough environment. Do you see the situation easing up in the foreseeable future?
I think the situation gets better. I think there's definitely light at the end of the tunnel. We're well advanced in our pricing transformation, so that's quite a big weight off your back as you transform and you bring down your pricing and so on. Our effective price per minute on prepaid is now 44 cents. So you're doing a big transformation that's already happening, and as you take that weight off, that does give you more opportunity to grow. And I think the encouraging thing is data. And if you look at some of what we're expecting on data,
well, that was the bright spot in your final quarter of 2014, wasn't it? The huge surge in data.
Very much so. And I think it's just going to continue to surge. So, I mean, the GSMA reckons that effectively data will grow tenfold from now till 2019. But it also says that the level of investment that you have to put in will be almost double than what you've put in the next 6 years versus the previous 6 years will be double the level of investment. So Africa will be something like 96 billion or something like that. I think the number was $96 billion that will be needed across Africa. So I think there's based on the formula of put the money in, build, make sure you've got the networks and so on to cope with the data revolution, and the data, and then create the content and so on that customers will use. And I think that will just continue to grow exponentially. And that's what will be very exciting for the company going forward.
Step out of your Vodacom CEO shoes for a moment. How do you feel, Shameel Joosub, about South Africa?
I'm proudly South African, so there's for me there's no exit mechanism. And definitely not thinking of emigrating anyway. This is home, and I think what we've got to do is to make sure that we can make it work. And that's important considering you're the CEO of Spain. So you've lived in a different environment. Yes, I have. And I think for me the important thing is, like, I always say there's no place like home, but I think we are faced with some real challenges, and I think we need a tighter working relationship between government and industry, and we need to choose our priorities and then execute on it very well to be able to get there. And I think you're almost going to say, look, here's the strategy, and we have a strong strategy in the NDP. I think we now we have the plan, and I think the first step is that you have a plan. The second step is that we have to move to implementation of the plan. And yes, even in a business, the plans are never 100% right. So we must stop debating the plan and move to how we're going to execute it. And essentially, if you're saying that's where we want to get to, you have to plan each year, because you're never going to get to the end goal without making sure that you can do it and achieve it in different milestones. And
so you believe in the plan? I
believe in the plan, but I think we need to move to the part where we stop debating the plan and actually just move to execution. And yes, we'll hit some hiccups along the way and we can fix it. But we need to also say, as an example, in telecoms, we have an opportunity to basically get to the goal that we're trying to get to. That goal will help to encourage, because for every 10% of access to communication, you get a 1.6% uplift in GDP. So effectively, if we can say, look, that's government's role, this is the industry role, this is the tools that the industry needs. For example, you need spectrum. So here's the tools that you need to do to be able to achieve it. Yes, we want rural coverage. Let's build it into our spectrum auctions and so on, and we make that part of the obligations or ask. Then you're going to get to the goal that you're trying to achieve. And I think if we go with clear leadership on each industry segment, you deal with power in the same way, you deal with education in the same way, and so on, then you know, it just has to be a cohesive plan, and we'll get there. So I think we just need more interworking, because we, you know, this is our country and we're going to make it work.
Shameel, thanks so much for your time. I've been chatting to Shameel Joosub, the CEO of Vodacom. You're watching Captains on CNBC Africa DSTV 14.